Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Lisa Carlton. I'm the CEO and founder of College Matchpoint, and I'm super excited tonight to talk to you guys about a topic which I think is really, really important in college admissions, which is college tours. And college tours have certainly evolved since the time when we all went and applied to college. It's definitely an area that colleges put a lot of energy into. And I think it's really a critical part of your students' process in applying to college. So welcome, I'm glad you're here. There is a chat box if you have questions. Everyone is muted, but you can definitely ask questions. And Bob, which you can't see over here on the other side, is collecting the questions. So we're gonna jump in and get started. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about tonight so that you guys have a good idea of what we're going to be doing. First of all, why college tours? I think it's important to lay out why it is important today to go on college tours. And there are some strategic reasons, in addition to helping your student figure out what college they may want to attend, that are important in terms of college tours. I have a little parent pledge that we have made a number of seasons back that we think is a really helpful way to enter a college tour with your student. I think it's also important for us to kind of go over that tonight, because I think one of the things that's difficult on our parents, in addition to being college consultants, how to kind of let your student drive the process can sometimes be tricky. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about planning your college tour, places to visit on campus, what makes a great college tour, how to evaluate it. And then, of course, we've got the chat box for you guys to ask whatever questions that we may not have thought to address tonight. So without further ado, let's jump into why in the world would you want to go on a campus tour? Many people ask me this question. They say, doesn't it just make sense to wait until my student gets accepted to college and then go visit colleges? And I always kind of pause and think, you're making a huge financial decision here, one that is, really large at the point at which what college costs right now. There's not many decisions this big that you wouldn't go test drive or check it out before you made that decision. Now you might say, yeah, but I can wait until the student gets in. The problem is oftentimes this that we're asking students to consider something they've never done before. What's the question that everyone's asking kids? Where do you want to go to college? What do you want from college? And they don't really know that because they've never done this before. Now, one of the things we do when we work with the students is that we have students come up with what's my criteria, which is just a fancy word for what do I want in my college. But that's really a hypothesis after they make it because they've never done this before. And I had a student in last night and I so appreciated his honesty. He was sitting in the waiting room and I came out and I was about to get him, bring him back for his appointment. He goes, man, I went on that tour and everything I thought I wanted isn't what I want. And I've got a whole lot more thoughts now. And that's like one of the points of a college tour, is that it shakes the student a little bit, gives them context for the whole discussion of college. Absent that context, we're talking about this thing off here that maybe they've gone to UT football games or whatever, but they really haven't thought about the place that I'm going to live for 4 years, that I'm going to study for 4 years, that I'm going to make my home. So with such a huge financial investment, getting out there and seeing options to try to see what fits your student, also what fits your budget, those things are really, really important. One other reason that college tours are important is the way that colleges now evaluate students. For most of you, you've probably heard the word demonstrated interest before, but if you haven't, I'll just give you a quick definition. It's showing the college that you're actually interested in them. The colleges are using a lot of sophisticated data to track and to try to determine which students who apply are most likely to actually attend. And that gives a student a bump in admissions. It's not going to get them in if they're way outside the middle 50% of the grades or the test scores, but it is an increasingly important part of the calculation. And I'm going to put an asterisk here, especially at private schools, although we are starting to see this more and more in public state colleges as well, but definitely in private schools. So the number one way that you can show interest to a college is because you go and visit them. It's kind of, if you think about the software industry, they really want to get you in front of a demo. If they can get you to demo, they think they may be able to sell it to you. The same thing is true about a college. They think if we can get you on campus, you may actually really realize this is a fantastic place. So it's both, you're making a really big investment, your student has no other way to have context for the college decision, and it actually impacts the decisions. So all of those things make touring colleges a pretty important part of the process. And when I say touring, I just want to clarify one thing, because one of the things I see becoming really big is, oh yeah, we saw X college, we drove past it. That's not touring. That's driving by. Touring is, I actually went on the official tour. Very important that you actually check in. We'll talk about that later. That I actually walked around the campus, saw what this was like, looked at the places that I'm interested in. That's a tour. So I just want to clarify that driving by is not really what we're talking about when we're talking about college tours. So we have seen that in our practice, we do believe that it is important for students to see not all the colleges on their list, but to see colleges usually starting for sure in their junior year. I think that's where it becomes real, and they're probably the best investment of time. I think seeing a few, if you're in an area where there's colleges that are interesting, sophomore year is not necessarily too soon. I just wouldn't get too attached to certain colleges, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So for all those reasons, and I'm guessing you're here so you believe touring colleges is important. One of the things that is so hard when you're planning a college visit is you've got all these dreams and hopes for your child. And in our society, many of those are tied up in college. And so it's really hard when you go on the trip to let this be your student. So I made a very simple parent pledge for college trips. It's certainly not, the end all, but number one is to step back and let your student take the lead. We're talking about them launching into adulthood. So throughout the whole college process, where we can, we want the student to take the lead. Second, remember that the trip is actually about the student. You've already been to college. And so sometimes that gets tricky. It's like, oh, I would have loved to go to this place. That doesn't necessarily mean, it might mean it, but it's not necessarily mean that it's the place your student wants to go. Let your student talk first. Bite your tongue until you know what your student thinks about the college. In other words, especially if there's a bunch of you on the trip, if everyone says that was a horrible place and the kid liked it, they may not want to come forth and say that. So try to let your student take the lead on what they say. Then there's a time for you to share your opinion as well. Understand that your student's evaluation of the college is going to be very different from theirs, and try to respect their opinion. It doesn't mean it doesn't sometimes make you scratch your head or want to bang your head against the wall, because we're talking about 17-year-olds, 16-year-olds making decisions. They're not always, we are thinking about life and all the big things, and they're sometimes thinking narrow. So they do need your input. But remember that we were 16 and 17 once, and that's how we made our decisions. And don't expect them to be able to enter this like a 45-year-old, because they're not there. Give up an expectation that the trip's going to be perfect. I think college trips are with our own kids, I loved our college trips and I hated them. And I think that is now, all these years later, I love them. But at the moment, kids get tired, they get worn out. This is stressful to think about. So the trip is unlikely to be stressful. The last thing I would say, and it's easy for me to say this because I'm probably older than most of you, is enjoy this, be grateful for this. This can be a great time for you and your student to bond, to talk about things, to have this trip. So allow for that, which means part of that is allowing for it not to be perfect, for sure. So those are just in the parent pledge, kind of what you bring to the table when you're trying to get ready for a college trip. Now, let's think about all the things we're looking at when a student actually goes on a college trip. It kind of goes back to when we think about what a student wants in their college, their criteria. And in their head, they're kind of going, are these my people? Are there good majors? Is it too small? Is it too big? All of those things. All these things are going through the student's head, and all these things are probably going through your head as you go on the trip. Where should we go? Now this, I could talk about really the whole hour because I actually have super strong opinions about this. My number one piece of advice, and you could leave this webinar right now after I say this, and I think you got a very valuable piece of advice, and that is, please vary the level of acceptance rates that you're taking your kids to. I cannot tell you how many kids walk through our doors and the first colleges they're seeing are colleges that they're really very unlikely to ever be accepted to. So that creates a problem because the student already sort of feels like, oh, I fell in love with this school, but there's no way I can get there. It's not the best setup for the college process. So, you know, oh, well, we were in, I thought we got by Stanford. If your student is a B student, is probably, honestly, not the best use of your time. So I definitely would be careful. And what I'm not saying not to go see some, you know, range of schools, or maybe your student is the student who is going to be a good student for Stanford, and going and see that is absolutely perfect. But when you're starting, especially if you're starting in the 10th grade, try to see a range of acceptance rates. We are, as a culture right now, are obsessed with the top 20, maybe 30 schools. There's a lot of great education out there for your students. And so as you're starting to think about, oh, we're going to be in this part of the country, or we're going to be in that part of the country, I challenge you to dig a little deeper, to not just pull that college that everybody's heard of in that town, but to do a little research or contact us and let us help you see a range so that the student can see a range. That's going to be important. It's also super important for families who are looking for merit aid, which many of our families are, because you're more likely to get merit aid in a school where you're more at the middle or upper end of the acceptance rate of the school. So I really, really encourage that. And I will say, I see this as a problem. I really do. And I encourage you to think about that. I also would encourage you to see some small schools, some big schools, even if your student says, I only want to go, a real typical thing for students to say, I'm only going to a school bigger than my high school, or I only want to go to a school that's at least 20,000 people, or whatever that thing is. If you're in an area and there's some other schools, stop by and see them, because the kids often are mimicking what they hear from their friends, and they don't necessarily have a lot of what would I say, like experience in this. So when they say something like, I only want this, kind of take it with a little grain of salt. I once had a student in the office, and I guess on the way to driving to the office, they were talking about touring colleges, and she said, I would never go to UT. So she sits down in the office and I say, so what college would you like to tour? You know, we're talking about touring. And she says, I definitely want to tour UT. And the parents look at her and they say, you just said you don't want to tour UT. These kids are going to change their minds a lot. So try not to let that surprise you or throw you off, because again, they haven't done this before. So seeing a range of colleges. And I think one of the best things to do is look for areas where you can cluster schools. It seems that everyone likes to start with Boston, which isn't a bad place to start, assuming, you know, you kind of go varied. There are all levels of schools there for sure. Other people seem to, popular ones, I would say, are Boston, LA, are probably the two most popular, sometimes the DC area. But pick an area where you can see a range of colleges. Now, one thing that we really encourage is, especially if your students in the 10th grade, start here in Texas. You don't need to go on a big long tour. Go see UT or A&M, then on an actual tour. Many times kids will tell us, oh, I know them, I've seen them forever. They haven't seen them as a potential academic institution that they're going to live in. So I highly encourage actually seeing it as though you don't live in Austin. Then you might want to see a mid-sized school. Well, there's TCU, there's SMU, there's Rice. All of those are mid-sized schools. And then there's smaller schools in our area. So the small liberal arts schools, there's Trinities, there's Southwesterns, there's Austin College. We don't have quite as many selective small liberal arts schools as some states, but definitely enough that you could get a little bit of a range, okay? So use Texas as a starting point. Or if you always go visit grandma and grandpa in Chicago, use Chicago. Use whatever kind of area you may be in as a starter point. The other thing that I really encourage, and I'm not sure this makes sense, I hope it does, would my student really go here? Here's a few things I'll tell you about Austin students that we know. I've been doing this 12 years with lots of different kinds of students. Most of our students don't love cold, cold weather. A few of them do. Some of them will go to the East Coast. The vast majority won't, but the vast majority will start their college search on the East Coast, okay? So if finances is a concern, before just going to that spot that kind of everyone goes to the college, kind of ask yourself, is this a place my student would really go? And make sure that it is. Make sure that it's really going to be a valuable trip for you, because on the front end of college touring, this isn't in my slides or whatever, it seems like you have all the time in the world to tour colleges. But what we know from working with students is that in the end, you really don't have that much time, because summers aren't great times to tour colleges, even though everybody does, because you don't see students on campus. And then you're going on an architectural tour, but you're just kind of stuck on that one rep. You're not getting to see the whole thing. So I would kind of say, is this really someplace my student's gonna go? Now, sometimes if you're planning on doing a lot of trips, then start, wherever you want, but kind of mapping the whole thing out of like, how many trips do we really think we're gonna get in here? Most of you are going to have some spring break family trips or summer vacations or jobs or other things that are going to limit your ability to do college tours. So be thoughtful and intentional about where you choose to visit. Now, how do you actually schedule a tour is one thing that people ask us all the time. And one of the things we will be sharing with you guys, we have a guide to college tours, so you'll get all this information in the deck. So, but the place where you schedule 95% of college tours is you go to their website, you go to the admissions, and you go to the visit tab. And then you choose the day you want to tour, and you pick. Now there's typically two things most colleges have, and then I'll speak about some of the extras. Almost everybody has a tour. Almost everybody has a tour. Many of them will also have an information session. The information section is where an admissions official is going to talk to you about how their admissions process works, what they want in test scores, what their middle 50% grades are, what are their new exciting programs that they're offering. So it's a more, from the administration standpoint, official. They can be great and they can be really boring. It kind of just depends who's giving it that day, honestly. I do think it's helpful. If you had to choose between the two, I would definitely choose the tour over the information session. I hope you don't have to choose that, but if you did have to choose, that's what I would choose. You're going to go on there, you're going to fill out the student's information, you're going to sign up for the time. For those of you who are thinking about spring break visits, tours fill up. And so one of the things that happens is that if you wait too late to determine, now I don't mean we don't need to, like, you don't need to email us tomorrow and say we need to know, but I mean, like, you in January want to kind of know what you're going to do in March and go on and sign up in that sometime in January for those spring break trips. Luckily, many colleges are in session when we have spring break here. So you should be pretty good to be able to see colleges with people there. Okay, so that should work out pretty well. So you're going to go on. You also have a few other things that colleges will let you sign up for. Some schools have an engineering tour, some schools are going to have a business tour. If your student is interested in other things, we'll talk about this a little later, you can set those up. If you get confused or you have something special that you want your student to do, call the admissions department. The admissions department is there to help you. They're like the customer service rep, if you will. Like, they're the person who wants to help you, because part of their job is to make sure that you actually, you know, have a good experience with their college. So don't be hesitant. Another question people ask me often is, well, should I have my student call or should I call if about tours? That's not going to matter. The thing is that students are in school when they're open. Now, when we get to calling about, oops, I sent you the wrong essay, or oops, I need to know, I want to change to being early decision or whatever, those are phone calls that the student or emails that the student needs to make. But at this point, setting up tours, it is absolutely appropriate for parents to do that. So I don't want you to worry about that at all. How should you prep for a college tour? I think prep is actually really important. I think one of the ways you can hopefully hand tours is to do your homework before you tour. Oftentimes, kind of like what I said before about like going to all the high-end colleges, the other thing that can happen is that you're like, oh, I've heard of that college, I think we're gonna go. They don't even have the major that your student is considering. So do your research before you determine where to go. So oftentimes a student or a family will ask me, like, where should we go? And I'm like, well, let me give you these colleges, take a look at them, which ones resonate with you, and then that's where you should go. If there is one thing we have trouble getting kids to do, it's college research. It's not necessarily just the kids, it's the fact that the websites are confusing, that kind of thing. So read about the colleges. Every one of your students has a College Planner Pro account with us. And in that is their college list. The FIS guide, which is, we think, one of the better college guides, is loaded in that system. So you can read kind of a Cliff Notes version about the college. I find the kids do well with that. And I think it gives them a good sense of, does this sound like anything I'd be interested in? And FISC does a good job of staying pretty neutral. So I think that's a really, really good option for you for considering what colleges to go to. Also, most of the colleges have tours online. We also, in our College Planner Pro account, there's Campus Reel, which is videos, and it's like kids talking about the dorms, and it's tours and all those things. So you've got a fair amount of resources to use to learn about the college. One thing I didn't put on here, but if you have any family friends who are at that college, you know, have your student talk to them. That's a great way. So your research saves you time and money, because you may learn, oh, this actually doesn't sound like what I'm actually interested in. And you save yourself a trip when you could get 10 minutes into a tour and realize, ooh, this isn't really what I'm looking for. Because again, what we're trying to do a little bit here is peel off the everybody loves X college, so it must be a great college. What we're looking for is your student's great college. And we have to do some research and help your student kind of figure that out. That's a little more complicated process. Finally, write down the questions that are important for your student and your family. That might be financial questions. That might be questions about major. That might be questions about acceptance into medical school. That might be questions about acceptance into law school. It might be, do they have a dance team? Do they have a golf team? Whatever your student is interested in, make sure that you're getting your questions down. I think this is really, really important. I feel like prep is something that gets overlooked a lot and will decrease the quality of your campus tour. And campus tours aren't cheap. They're not cheap in money and they're not cheap in time. So make sure that you take the time to do that. Okay, now then, you believe that you should tour, you've got your little parent pledge, you're on the way to tour. Let's talk about places that you want to visit on campus, because I think this is where a college visit can go from being meh to being really rich. I will cop to a bias towards less schools in a day and going deeper into the school, especially at the beginning of the process, so the student begins to kind of understand college life, okay? The tour, of course, is a marketing event. It is. That's not to say it's not a good one and it won't get useful information, but the college has a goal of showing you all their best things and telling you, you know, some kind of repetitive things that you hear on every college tour. Some places I think you should plan on visiting after the tour or in addition to the tour. I'm going to move my order here a little bit. The number one thing that Bob and I believe helps students, especially in the junior year students, I wouldn't say as much in sophomores, is sitting in on a class. Now, some kids are like, oh, I don't want to sit in on a class. What if they ask me something? But it's really helpful for them to see what a college class is like. Is it 300 people and I can barely see the professor? Or is it people around a room? Is it doing problem? What is it like? Are people engaged? Are they asking questions? Is it interesting? All those things. Super important. In order to make the ability to sit in a class, you would have to call the office, but many colleges are very, very open to this. And I think our students constantly tell us that sitting in on a class is one of the most valuable things that they do on a college tour. Go to the student center, just sit down, get a cup of coffee. Is everybody on their phone? Are people talking to each other? Are they in groups? Do they look happy? Are they all studying? What are they doing? Same with the library. So, you know, make sure that you do that as well. So go to the library, go to the student center, visit a classroom. If tutoring, all colleges have tutoring, but if tutoring is important, do that. Career Center, you know, we're always surprised that more people don't look at the Career Center. What are you going to get at the end here? Labs, coaches, performing arts. They can really set up many things for you to do on campus. Those things you're going to have to call for, though. So just know that. What makes a great college tour? Okay, we really believe seeing at least some of your colleges in session is really important. Now, I can tell you that with our own children, we didn't see all of them in session, but you definitely want to see some of them during the school year. Eat in the cafeteria, get the feel of the campus, take pictures and notes. This may seem crazy, but if you're going to see a bunch of colleges, even like 3 or 4, the number one thing that students say to us when we say, hey, tell me about your college tour, they go, oh, I can't remember which one was that? Now, which one was that? That's actually an issue because you just invested in this trip and we're trying to figure out which campus your student actually likes. So, you know, make sure that you have some way to record that that the student is recording that. Pictures is often a great way. Notes in their phone, I think those things work great. The other items we kind of already talked about in terms of where to visit on campus. I would say one other place that students mention a lot to us is the gym facilities to work out. So if that's an important part of your student's life, really important. And because I work with a lot of students who have learning differences, if your student's going to use accommodations, go to the learning center. There are many people think, oh, I don't want to do that because it's going to hurt my chances in admissions. That's not true. I would say it might help your chances in admissions. So definitely, if learning support is important, make sure that you check that out. One of the things that we put at the back of our guide is having the student write down what's their college criteria, i.e., what is it that they think is important in this in this college decision, which they will have done with us, but which in truth is always changing, right? Just like if I go buy a car, I think I want this, and then I drive on, I'm thinking, oh no, I actually want that. I mean, the college is the same way, and especially given the fact that the kids have not done this before, what are the things that they think they want? And then when they see it, is that the thing they wanted? Really important. So we ask them to rate it and put some notes. We don't require the students to use this. I'm always excited when they do because it tends to get at a little more specific. Oftentimes they come back, yeah, I kind of liked it, I kind of didn't, yeah. And it's hard for us because what we're wanting to do is use this information to actually then come up with more colleges for your student. So the more information the student gives us, the better we can do that. So that's one option. We have a few guides that I think are very relevant to this discussion, which what you can get on our website and we will be sharing. One is the guide to campus tours. One is the guide to demonstrated interest, understanding how important demonstrated interest is. For example, after a student visits a campus, it's a great opportunity to email the local rep and say, oh, I just visited your campus and I loved it, or I had a question or something, and build that connection. So I think that's really awesome. One other guide that I think I would also love for some of you to look at is the guide to highly selective schools. It's really important if you're going to be taking your student to see highly selective schools that you understand what it takes to get into a highly selective school today. And so I think that guide can be helpful, especially if you're feeling yourself kind of easing into wanting to see those campuses that are more 20% acceptance rates and lower, because some of the schools in there when you went to college were like, that school's easy. Not today. So I understand for a subsection of you is really, really important to set your student up for success. I've kind of plowed through college tours here. Someone asked how to visit specific departments. There's kind of two ways, really. One is your bigger schools are going, mid-sized to bigger schools are often going to have their main tour, and then they're going to have subsection tours like touring engineering or touring business. But what if your student's interested in anthropology? They probably don't have a special anthropology. However, if you call, my students this year have talked to so many different professors at different schools, it's amazing. So what you need to do is call admissions and say, my student is especially interested in X, and I'm wondering if there is someone that they could talk to in that department. The really cool thing is at many of the schools, the students actually will sit down and talk to professors. Now, from an admission standpoint, sometimes everybody gets excited, and which it's exciting. It probably doesn't necessarily impact admissions, because one of the strange things to many of us is that faculty and admissions don't talk a lot. So, but it's a great thing from admissions. So it may not be that Professor X is going to pop the student over the top. However, it gives your student wonderful content to talk about. Most students in their admissions process, and I'm getting in the weeds now, are going to have to write why I like the college that I'm applying to, an essay on that. I will tell you that is the #1 essay students struggle with the most. But if they visited it, they had the chance to talk to a professor and actually get specific about what they like. They have wonderful, wonderful content to talk about in their essays. So I think that is calling the admissions office is the #1 way. Some people will call the actual department. You can do that, but I would do that as a last choice. Usually admissions will work that for you. If you can't get them to do it, then I would call the department, because I actually call college departments all the time, and I find them super helpful because they don't have the gatekeeper. So if you get stuck, I wouldn't stop from calling the department. So I hope that's helpful. Another great question that somebody asked, which you probably should have had a slide on this actually, is what are some good questions to ask in a college tour? And I think some of my favorite questions on a college tour are asking the tour guide, like, what do you love most here? You know, what is it that you really, really love here? What's unique about this school that you have that you don't think you see at any other schools? I think the students tend to fixate sometimes on things that are very common in most colleges, the student to teacher ratio, the study, many students will come back, I love their study abroad program. The truth is most study abroad programs today are pretty darn good. There is a handful of schools that are maybe a notch up from that, but so we want to dig in, and I think that personal piece, how do you make your decision to study here? I also think a really important question is, tell me how the schools helped you get internships, make a network, connect with people. What kinds of things have you had the opportunity to do with professors? What kind of research have you gotten to do? What kind of opportunities are there for that? And what percentage of students actually get to do that? So is that a common thing that happens at this campus, or is it not? I think the social piece is also really important. If your student, for example, doesn't really want Greek life and a school has 50% Greek life, well, gosh, what's that like for the students who aren't in Greek life? That's a good question. What other things do students get involved in? What is it like? Dorm life, you know, do the dorms have a lot of activities? What kind of, what are the dorms like? I will tell you, modern day students want nice dorms. They don't like the cinder block kind of a thing. So I think those kind of questions. I think also asking outcomes of students who've graduated, you know, and I think digging into those a little. For example, if your student is pre-med and they tell you 80% of the students are getting into med school, your follow-up question is, what's your process to weed students out of that group? In other words, is that any student that wants to go to med school, or is it a funnel? Because it's usually a funnel. So I think questions about your major is really important. I think things about, I noticed one of the things students really want is like, so what do you do when you get off campus? I think students today, especially growing up in Austin, they're used to having a lot to do. Like, where do you go? What else do you do that's not here on campus? I think that's a pretty big question that students have. Those are a few. There's a lot of questions in the guide, so you can look at those. And the last question, oh, great question. How to tour if your student is undecided, and is the secondary question, will it hurt you if you check that you're undecided? I love undecided students. I mean, let's face it, like, these kids are young. I think when your student is undecided, it depends a couple of things. If they're deciding between this major and that major, I think a college tour can be a great way to potentially learn a little bit more about those and help them. If they really, today I had a student who's interested in English, biology, wait, what else was it? But it was like a whole bunch of things. He's gonna probably be a liberal arts major with maybe like a science minor or something. So if it's really, really different, then what kind of interdisciplinary majors are available at a college that the student can mix and match a bunch of things? So I think we have two groups. For the group who maybe has it narrowed down to 3 things, I think college, saying you're undecided and learning a little bit more about those can help. For the truly, and there are truly undecided kids who are going into college undecided, how does the college facilitate that? Is there ability to make your own major? Is there ability to do 2 majors? Is there a major, can you do a major, a minor, and a minor? So how much mixing up can I do? It is not going to hurt the student at the tour level if they mark that they're undecided. And just as a little precursor, it's not going to necessarily hurt them in the college admissions process either. They just need to be able to articulate some, not when they tour, but ultimately when they apply, they're going to need to be able to articulate some academic interests. But I wouldn't worry about that at this point. I really appreciate you guys joining us this evening. I know your evening time is valuable. And again, I encourage you to review the guide. It does have more questions in it to ask. It is especially good to kind of get your student moving and owning this. the guide to demonstrated interest, and then the guide to highly selective schools. I think all three of those can be really, really helpful to you. And thank you for spending your Thursday night with us. And we look forward to seeing you guys in the office. Thank you so much. Good night.